Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Recycling Markets Outlook Forum, hosted by the National Recycling Coalition, the Environmental Protection Agency, and Renew. We have a great webinar for you today and a lot of participation we're really excited about. My name is Marissa Segundo, and I'll be helping on the back end of this webinar. So I'd like to start, before we hand it over to the NRC President, Dave Keeling, a couple of just housekeeping items. You'll notice as an attendee that you are muted. That is by intention, but we don't want to miss any of your questions. So you'll see on your bottom panel a Q&A bar, and that's at the bottom of the screen. Just click on that and click just to send a question to attendees. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we have. There's a lot of great content and panelists, so we look forward to your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Also, there will be a recording available of this webinar, and that'll be available early next week. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Keeling, the president of the National Recycling Coalition.
Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this exciting event. Thank you, Marissa. First of all, I'd like to say a few words about some of the things that the NRC is doing in the realm of market development. If I could have the next slide, please. Oh, maybe I have to do that. There we go. The National Recycling Coalition has been doing these webinars since early in 2018 in response to some of the activity that's been going on in the marketplace, specifically the National SWORD implementation that left a lot of us kind of scrambling for markets. During that time frame, we've reached out to not only our state recycling organization affiliates, as you see on the screen here, but also we reached out to a number of organizations to partner with on these programs. Specifically, reached out to the Renew program, which is operated or administered by RRS, the consulting firm out of Ann Arbor. And then also we reached out to the US EPA to get their assistance in terms of content and speakers and all that type of activity. Also, the other organizations you see here have provided support, content, speakers from time to time. So really appreciate not only the State Recycling Organization affiliates, which we co-hosted a lot of the in-person webinars with, workshops with, excuse me, but also our partners as well. I also want to thank the other NRC affiliates and also non-affiliate State Recycling Association organizations that help to promote the workshops and also attended on another one. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for quite some time. As you all know, the National SWORD implementation restrictions really were announced in 2017. The NRC put out a press release kind of expressing our concern about the restrictions after we found out exactly what was happening. Then, in addition to a webinar that was hosted by the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center as part of our monthly webinar series for NRC members, we had Robin Wiener, the president of ISRI, Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, do an update on the National SWORD and the restrictions and things like that, which quickly led into the beginning of our workshop series on April 4th in Portland. We did 4 workshops then, and then right after the first Portland workshop, we asked RRS through their Renew program to join us to provide us content, staffing support, and also the technology that we'll be using today. And then we continued in 2019 and doing a number of workshops. And we also were able to get the US EPA to join us, and they've been a great help in terms of speakers, content, and also reaching out to other organizations to provide support. In 2020, we also continued with our workshop series, which I'll talk about. And then obviously, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to shift gears a little bit, and that's the result. This webinar is a result of that. As you can see, this is kind of a synopsis of what takes place at the in-person regional market development workshops in the last 2 years. It's a very intense, information-filled full-day event. What's the difference is, while you get a lot of the same information today on this webinar, we are able to really talk about the nuts and bolts of what's happening in your region of the country and find out how we can collaborate to get things done. Next, please. And as you see, this kind of shows you where we've been across the country. What was kind of unique, in February 11th, we had 2 webinars going on the same day, out in San Diego, California with Zero Waste San Diego, and also in Memphis, Tennessee with Keep America Beautiful. That was the first time we actually partnered or co-hosted with a non-affiliate. We continue to do that in the future. We're working with ISRI and also SWANA to get that done. I also want to thank all of our, beside our partners, the US EPA and Renew, and all of our affiliates. I also want to thank our sponsors. For example, Strategic Materials, ISRI, SCS Engineering, the Construction and Demolition Recycling Coalition, Pratt Industries, of course, Keep America Beautiful, K-Rig, Dr. Pepper as well, and the list goes on and on. We could not do this without you because it takes a lot of man hours to put these together. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. I'd like to turn it over to Marty Seaman from RRS. Thank you all. Enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. It is really kind of gratifying and really humbling, the response. As Marissa said, I think there's a lot of great content ahead that hopefully will help us all navigate together what's a really trying time for us all. You can see the title for my slide was, lessons learned, and that came from a roadmap down to best practices to lessons learned. And so I really think this is kind of a humble attempt to say, here's some things that might work. Here is a kind of a report back on some really great activities that have occurred over the last couple of years that to really set the stage for what we hope is a real, strong effort together in trying to, weather these storms now. As Dave mentioned, the Renew services as a part of RRS, I think are interesting in that they really represent our private, for-profit companies' approach to our investment, 30-year-long investment in the recycling industry, and that is, very much a pro-recycling message that recognizes the importance of innovation in all things technology, governance, and processing, that is looking to evolve the waste stream and to make sure we're essentially implementing and recovering as much recyclables as we can in a way that's really effective and is contributing. And so it's a really easy match for us to be involved in this kind of operation. We work really closely with the SROs, and we know that all recycling starts with a real marketplace, but it really involves that whole recycling infrastructure. And this allows us a place to work at and with all the various stakeholders in the recycling stream to make things happen. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we get through it and some of these things that might work going forward. I do want to recognize, as Dave said, NRC, the Markets Committee, some of those folks, Karen O'Brien early on, who brought us on and who is still participating, and also the RRS team that has been involved with many of you at different locations and really carrying the water on this. So I just wanted to recognize them along with Chantal and Wayne now from the NRC. Go ahead. This slide is there because it's mandatory that everyone state how important this is, and we all know this, right? And so we're gonna leave it at that and move to the next slide. I do want to talk about this just for a bit more, just in that in terms of the workshops and our attempt to both facilitate what the NRC was wanting to do and to bring as many people together. One of the things that we really stress as an important part of being effective is not just the importance of collaboration, but also the importance of bringing new collaborators to the table, asking the question of who's not here, who needs to be here, and trying to make sure that we're not only bringing all the right players in, all the players in, but also that we're framing up our solutions and our problems in a way that are reactive to all of those folks. And so it's it's a respectful process that says, how do we get the various interests leveraged so we all can do better at recycling? Go ahead. Some of the other elements that really were permeated through these workshops and were reinforced by these workshops is how important recycling is to folks, in the sense of, especially around local markets and how those local markets interact regionally and nationally, but that the resiliency, the capture of the local economic benefit is really an important driver that continues to be, should be a point of emphasis and should be looked at. There's a serious recognition of not just the job creation, but the sustainability components. And as we think about building better coming out of the current COVID situation, these are the kinds of programs that, besides being essential now, we want to make sure we're continuing to invest in going forward. And while we talk about markets, it's not just the mill, right? It's the whole supply chain, and we need to recognize that collection is very uneven across the board, and we need to be able to access those materials if we really want to make recycling work. Interesting, and I think some fun takeaways as we go through a couple of these shows or a couple of these events. Dave said they were really dynamic, each very different depending on the local organization and who participated. And so you can see some different things popping out in the questions that were asked, in the questions that, and how those questions were answered. But as you go through, you can see material quality here. In Chicago, political will being a big issue. If you look down below and add broad collaboration to it, for the couple hundred people there, they thought 75% of them thought that's what was missing, that ability to get people to work together. So interesting. Next show, a different way for people to weigh in, coming to that point of people just need to understand better what it means to recycle. Go ahead. And then in the San Antonio one, a different kind of approach, recognizing that there's best practices, and a part of best practices is the appropriate supporting mechanisms that really make it work. And that certainly resonates with what we understand, that it's policymakers, it's electeds, it's community organizations, it's everybody that has to embrace these ideas. And I think from a benefits component, one of the best parts about all of this was, go ahead, next slide, is that there was really a very legitimate exchange of ideas. We had some success in bringing a lot of those different players to the table. As I look through today, all the thousands of people who are signed up, there's a broad sector of folks there, and that's a great first step in having us be able to exchange those ideas and do that in a productive way. Go ahead. Next slide. So in some broad, strokes, and some outcomes from these various workshops, certainly a recognition of the regional recycling opportunities and thinking about things locally, regionally. As I said, this continuing to engage and some follow on with engaging these various types of stakeholders and making sure they're an a very important part of what we do in all of our recycling efforts. I think another key takeaway, the quality and quantity. Quality is really important, but there's a lot of material that's high quality that's not being collected or captured, and that is what it's going to take for the value and the investment behind some of these markets. And that policy is a component of that as well. Go ahead, next slide. I want to just take one quick minute before I turn it back to the panel and we proceed, but that is, we're talking about recycling today, and we should be, but as businesses and as organizations, we know how important it is to really make sure recycling is recognized as an essential service, but also that it gets through, that there's business challenges, there's really hard challenges here, and we need to advocate for the resources that first protect our people, and then protect our businesses and protect our industry, so we're in a position to continue to solve problems going forward. And so there's a lot of great resources out there. We're just serving as a clearinghouse, but I really want to encourage everyone to take advantage of all those resources because we all want to see everybody make it through this kind of challenging time. And with that, I'll turn it back. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Marty. This is Chantal Fryer. I'm Director of Recycling Market Development at the South Carolina Department of Commerce, and I'm also NRC Markets co-chair along with Wayne Jurdy out of Minnesota. So we are so pleased to have you and your team help us with the workshops, and we've just really enjoyed working with you, and I really appreciate your time and expertise. So with that, I just want to do a couple housekeeping items, as we are recording this webinar and it will be available on nrcrecycles.org on that website next week. We'll also mention that if you are having trouble hearing or if there's a reverb, you may want to call in on your phone and not use your computer audio. And then as markets questions come along, we do have panelists that will be addressing them. Particularly, there is a glass markets question, and we will be addressing that with Scott DeFife in just a few minutes. But in the interim, I'd like to introduce one of our special partners in these workshops and now this special edition webinar. Ron Vance with the Environmental Protection Agency is going to speak about America Recycles Day activities. And if any of you attended the Recycling Innovation Fair in DC last year during America Recycles Week, you know the quality of work that they do. Ron leads America Recycles Day activities and serves as Chief of the Resource Conservation Branch in the Office of Land and Emergency Management at EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And Ron, we're so glad to have you, and you're up next.
Thank you, Chantal, and thank you all, everybody who's on the line here and participating. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes for those that aren't familiar with what has been going on around what we call America Recycles. But they gave a good kind of snapshot of history in terms of when some of the international policy changes happened and kind of when we started seeing impacts and challenges here in recycling and in late 2017 going into 2018. Part of EPA's engagement was initially in the beginning part of 2018 was doing listening. We met with a lot of stakeholders and started having dialogue. And one of the things that was requested by a lot of these stakeholders is for EPA to leverage its convening power to get people together to share experiences and identify opportunities to kind of collaboratively address some of the core challenges within the recycling system. So that led towards the end of 2018. For those who aren't familiar, America Recycles Day is on November 15th every year. So on November 15th of 2018, really EPA brought together in a national convening opportunity stakeholders that represented kind of various players across the system. And the idea was to get the full value chain together to start having discussions, start sharing kind of what the challenges are and recognizing how each one of those actors in the system kind of impact the others, but also how we can leverage actions across multiple of those players to collectively make a change for the better and strengthen the recycling system. So that was really the whole idea of that 2018 summit. We had 45 organizations, including EPA, that during that summit signed a pledge to work together. Really, in that first year following the 2018 summit, in the first year, these 45 organizations formed work groups. 4 key areas were identified within those work groups, being education and outreach, infrastructure, market development, and measurement. And so work groups formed around each one of those 4 areas and worked over the 2019 year to really first identify and come up with common understanding of what the challenges are or were at that time, and then beginning to identify actions that can help address those challenges. And even within there, can the group prioritize those actions and agree to some collective collaborative actions that can be implemented from there. We can move to the next slide. So that brings us to November 15th of 2019. And so on that date, we held our second annual America Recycle Summit. And really, I want to, thank all of our partners, all the collaborators that were part of that. And really, it was a collective gathering, collective celebration of what's been achieved in the first year. As Chantal mentioned, we did have an innovation fair, which was an inaugural concept of how do you take kind of really the idea of a science fair and apply it to the recycling challenges that we were dealing with. So we did have this innovation fair that really highlighted some of the more innovative approaches that were available, being applied, being thought about, and highlighting that. I also want to acknowledge that the pledge that we had with 45 signers on the original event more than quadrupled. So we were at 150 at the time of the summit. Now we're around 200 of those participating. And we published the National Framework for Advancing U.S. Recycling System that really took that year of work that those work groups worked on and summarized across those 4 areas. What were the key challenges? What actions have been taken in that first year? And then, the actions and kind of steps ahead of us. So we can move to the next slide. Within that being, we are talking about kind of the markets. I do want to highlight the market development work that's going on as part of the America Recycles Network. As Dave mentioned, it's been a great collaboration between EPA and NRC and having Renew RRS support through that. And so we did hold a series of successful workshops when we came on board in 2019, and a couple we were able to get done in 2020. Do look forward to continuing engagement. We'll see how and what form that looks like moving forward, but it's been an important feature to having this dialogue and furthering market development efforts. Do want to call out as well for folks that aren't familiar with the comprehensive procurement guidelines. It's part of the federal preferred procurement of products with recycled content. So EPA kind of maintains the list of designated products and the recommended levels of recycled content within there. And so we just issued on the 7th of this month, opened up a public comment on the existing products that are designated and the recommended levels. So if you want to take a look at that, if you have any comments for us, please do share those through the public comment period. Those are open until early July. And if we can move to the next slide. And so the last thing I'll close with is just kind of a save the date for, again, coming up America Recycles Day. And the National Summit that we are planning for November 16th and 17th this year. We are planning to do a repeat of the Innovation Fair as well. So just kind of keep an eye out for that, and more information will come. I didn't get the web address on here, but if you're looking for more information on anything I've talked about, it's epa.gov/America Recycles. But again, I'd like to thank you all for your participation in the webinar, and specifically NRC and Renew RRS for their partnership and putting this on as well.
Thank you, Ron. Marissa Segundo again. We really want to make sure that this event involves your participation. So we're going to take a moment, as you saw on the slides from our live interactive market development workshops. We like to ask live questions to get all of the attendees excited about participating, and we hear your voice. We have more than we have nearly 900 people on this call, so looking forward to hearing from a lot of voices. So if you have a cell phone, you can actually do this in two different ways. So simply, if you are online, which most of you probably are, you can simply go to pollev.com/recycle123, or you can grab your phone, pick it up like you're going to send a text message, and the number you're going to text is 37607. And the message within that text is simply recycle123. So that's recycle123, no spaces, it's not cap sensitive. And that's going to just open the door to our live polling. We're going to do this throughout the event. So as we are, as we're turning to our first question, we're asking you, what if you could describe in just one word how you're feeling about COVID-19 as it relates to your organization or business? What would it be? And you're seeing the words as more people put one word, it's getting bigger. So opportunity, that's a very positive word to hear. We're seeing concerns, very warranted. Uncertain, we're hearing that. Anxious, resilient. We've got some people that are concerned and worried, but I do see opportunity and opportunities coming up there. So we're looking forward to our panelists today telling us about some opportunities that they see from their purview. And of course, your questions as they come in. So now we're seeing uncertain get bigger and opportunities still in the lead. So that's a good thing. And we'll also provide these in the, you'll see that in the recording that we provide. So we have another opportunity for a question. I'm going to switch in the interest of time. And our next question, you'll actually be able to put more than one word. And we are asking, let me switch to that question. What is the greatest need you have for your organization at this time? And as I mentioned, you don't have to put one word, you can put multiple words. We may be getting a couple laggards from the last question, but we're seeing political will, recyclable and reusable PPE. Wow, this is what happens when you have 800 people on a live poll. I'm seeing continued funding, collaboration, keep recycling, absolutely. Leadership, data and information, safety. So we've got a lot of options here: awareness, direction, consistency. So a lot of things that we can consider, and make sure that you're using the live poll function as we do this, because I'm seeing some come in under chat. We want to make sure we've got your voice. So understanding, triple bottom line, this is a lot to digest, but thank you all for participating. And like I said, keep this nearby. We'll be doing this throughout the event. So I'll turn it back over to Chantal Fryer to introduce our fantastic markets panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Marissa. We have assembled a panel of distinguished industry experts to provide you the latest information on recycling markets. We're seeing lots of questions, good questions coming in regarding specific commodities and the uncertainty right now of handling those. And the real intent for us today is to share our information so that attendees who, if you know how recycling end-use markets work and what the conditions are, you can have a better understanding of the fluctuations, but also understand that ultimately they are here to stay in the United States. They're not going away. As a recycling market development staffer here at Commerce, we see recycling as an industry that tends to be volume driven, ultimately quality focused. There typically are pennies margins on these commodity materials, so freight and logistics has a great impact. And the wonderful thing is that because we're a nation of entrepreneurs, we are highly entrepreneurial. in nature. So there are few vertically integrated companies across the nation, and a lot of those tend to be in paper and in metals. So even in these uncertain conditions, we're seeing continued investment here in South Carolina from both entrepreneurs as well as vertically integrated companies like Sunoco. There's still demand for paper, plastic, metals, and glass. And really, all of these commodities are going to be represented on our panel today, especially with a highlight on petrochemical trends and how they influence commodities such as plastics. So what I want to do is just introduce all of our panelists now in order of speaking. First off, we have Joe Pickard, who is going to cover metals, and he serves as Chief Economist and Director of Commodities at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, also affectionately known as ISRI. Tison Keel will cover PET plastics, and he's Senior Director of PET, PETA, EO derivatives at IHS Markit, as well as Joel Morales Jr., covering polyolefins and HDPE, and he serves as Executive Director of Polyolefins Americas, additionally at IHS Markit. Nina Butler is CEO of More Recycling and also an NRC board member, and she's going to highlight the National Recycling Coalition and the Recycling Market Development by Recycling platform, in addition to plastic recycling trends. Furthermore, we have Bill Moore, who will cover paper recycling. He serves as president of Moore and Associates. And then we'll round out the panel with a presentation from Scott DeFife, who will cover glass recycling. And he serves as Glass Packaging Institute president. So with that done, I'd like to welcome Joe Pickard. Joe, you're batting off first, and the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Hope you can hear me okay. And thanks very much for the invitation to join you all. I know we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to keep my opening comments relatively brief, and then look forward to your questions as we progress, because I think that's really where a lot of the value added comes from, is actually the opportunity to interact and discuss the questions that are on your mind, so that you get the information that you need. Having said that, I do want to thank the organizers for this, and you know, it's interesting to see the words that were coming back in terms of concerns and opportunities that people are thinking about today. And certainly for ISRI members, this has been an extremely challenging time. And I think during times like this, it actually re-emphasizes the need for collaboration, not just amongst associations and consultants, but across public and private sectors. So it's great to have everyone's participation on this call today. From ISRI members' perspective, certainly this has got to be one of the most challenging times they've ever faced, and it's every possible challenge you could imagine. I think markets were already challenging enough as it was. Transportation issues were already challenging to begin with. And now you're dealing with a large number of HR and health and safety concerns, in addition to slowdown in manufacturing and the volatility in commodity prices that we're seeing. So moving on to that particular topic, during normal times, certainly we're seeing a relationship between manufacturing output in the United States and demand for metals. And obviously, the focus of my remarks today are on the metals, but happy to take any questions you might have outside of that. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the composite purchasing managers index for the United States against GDP. And so obviously there's a close connection between manufacturing and scrap metal generation, but scrap metal demand as well. And so when we're seeing this rapid decline in manufacturing, and the PMI numbers for manufacturing for this month, according to IHS Markit, hit I think 133-month low on manufacturing, and for the service sector, it hit an all-time low. And we're certainly seeing that in the steel manufacturing sector as well. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side of the screen, this time last year, steel mills were operating at about an 81% capacity utilization rate. The latest numbers from the American Iron and Steel Institute show that that capacity utilization rate was 55.8% for the week ending April 25th, 2020. And so when steel mills obviously are producing that much less steel, they're demanding that much less scrap as a result, because scrap is the largest raw material input for steel production in the United States. And you can see just on the far right side of the screen how much steel production is coming down. For again, 1 year ago, the US produced about 1.9 million net tons of steel. The corresponding period this year down to 1.25 million net tons. Next slide, please. Moving on to the non-ferrous side of the metals equation, it has not been a pretty picture either. I should mention on the, just going back quickly to the ferrous scrap, you can say on the slide, the ferrous scrap market. As we saw manufacturing cratering, as we saw steel mill production coming down and scrap demand coming down, obviously we saw scrap metal prices down significantly this year as well. For most of the benchmark sort of obsolete grades, down about 40% year on year. And I think for a lot of these markets, the recurring theme really is which side of the equation is contracting more quickly. And that means supply is contracting sharply. Collections are down. Material moving into the scrap yards is certainly down. A lot of yards have curtailed retail operations, although we're starting to see that change a little bit. But also we're seeing the slowdown from the demand side. And so the question on pricing has been, which side is slowing down more quickly? So for the non-ferrous scrap, certainly aluminum has had the most difficult part in terms of price performance, down about 18%, because we haven't seen the cutback in global primary aluminum production that we've seen for some of the other metals. If you look at the global picture, certainly we're seeing a slowdown in Chinese demand that has been the case for the last several years. This shows the share of Chinese demand for the different scrap metal commodities from ferrous to stainless to non-ferrous. And again, even as we're looking for China to relax some of its regulations on the higher quality non-ferrous scrap, there's no question that we're not going to get back to the share of Chinese demand for non-ferrous scrap that we saw in years past. Final slide, please. And so that's just a brief recap of what we're seeing in terms of metal pricing, domestic manufacturing, and global demand. In terms of what ISRI is doing for the industry, certainly we're closely tracking policy developments, both at the federal and state level, to provide our membership with updates and how that's going to impact their businesses. We have petitioned for inclusion of metals in the FMCSA emergency declaration, in addition to requesting national essential designation for U.S. recycling operations. We have a number of COVID-19 related resources on our website, so please check that out at isri.org. And then finally, we do have weekly EHS and Markit updates. If you'd like to be added to the distribution list for those weekly reports, just let me know, and that's going to do it for my prepared remarks. So thanks. Or I could keep talking, really up to you.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Sure.
Next up, we have Tison Keel from IHS and Joel Morales. Tison Keel will be covering PET, and Joel will be talking about HDPE and polyolefins. And really, we invited IHS Markit to cover how petrochemicals influence the commodities across the U.S. There is a connection there, and so with their expertise from a global research and analysis standpoint, they can provide us with some real insight on these market trends. And so, Tison, you're up first, and we welcome you to the platform.
Oh, thank you very much. And good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you happen to be located. I hope I don't come across too much as a Jeremiah in this presentation. What I want to try and present is the fact that there are some definite new challenges in addition to previously existing challenges in recycling, particularly PET, that we have to deal with to maintain the momentum of recycling that has built up over the last 18 months to 24 months. So next slide, please. If you're not familiar with IHS Markit, we just had a reference to our PMI. That's the Purchasing Managers Index that was quoted in the last talk. The IHS Markit has expertise in analytics and forecasting all the way from economics through petrochemicals, including crude oil and natural gas. This is from our oil and gas guys, and I want to set the stage here that you see we're looking at really 3 different scenarios for the crude oil price forecast, which is really connected also to the recovery in the economy as a result of the downturn that we're currently experiencing. So I think everybody would agree this is a very volatile time, and it's very difficult to say with certainty which way and how quickly things might start to turn around. But we're, now go back please, still. The key message on this is if you look for the next 2 years, 20 through 21, even in the most optimistic case, the crude oil price that we're forecasting doesn't get back up to where it has been for the last couple of years. So crude oil prices are going to remain low, and that's going to be important when we talk about these polymers, PET, polyethylene, polypropylene, because they're based on crude oil and natural gas. All right, next slide. Thank you. So where we were, as I said, we really had some really good momentum in recycling. The major brand owners have set out some very ambitious targets for post-consumer content in their packages. And that affects a lot of different polymers, but PET in particular. The challenge that they were already faced with, if you look at the USA collection rate, the USA collection rate has been stuck, but there was a lot of optimism, 3, 6, 12 months ago that, by unsticking that or increasing the collection rate was going to be something that could very potentially help to increase recycle rates and grow that target, hit the targets that the consumer products companies were hitting. But COVID-19 has really thrown a wrench into the works, if you will, in the ways that I've listed here. I've already seen a couple of questions come up in the board about, especially in smaller communities, the local recycling facilities either not taking recycling or discouraging recycling. I think basically what we're seeing right now is more PET is going into the landfill than previously. So it's going to be hard to get us even back up to that 30% rate in the short term. We've got deposit refunds are being withheld for the moment in 8 out of the 10 states where we have bottle bills and bottle deposits. We've had some legislative initiatives. The state of Washington recently, the governor vetoed a mandatory PCR content bill because it was going to cost the state more money, and they're already in difficult times. So basically, the main challenge that I think the organizations that are participating in this call, their challenge and all of our personal challenges is to maintain the level of attention to the issue of plastics waste, plastics in the ocean, and the need for recycling, because the other forces that are out there are really going to inhibit collection. So that's what's changed. And what's not changed, if you heard me talk, over the last 12 months before the economic downturn, the petrochemical cycle for PET is shown here. And without boring you with a high school chemistry lesson, basically the top part of the graph, these are crude oil based chemicals primarily. The bottom half is partly crude oil, partly natural gas. But the polymers that we're talking about here are directly produced from crude oil and natural gas. And in the case of PET, the market was already oversold. You see the operating rates in the orange boxes. In a commodities, chemical or plastics operation, if you're not operating in the high 80s, preferably 90% of your nameplate capacity, your economics are not good. It's a very competitive environment. And what you see is all the products, the raw materials and PET operating rates are low, which meant that even before the crude oil prices came down, we were forecasting low prices in a very competitive environment for PET and its raw materials. So it's not just the polymer itself, it's the upstream products that are also an issue. So in summary, You know, I'm suggesting that our commitments to meet post-consumer content targets, it's going to be difficult. You know, you've got too much raw material, too much product. You got very low cost crude oil that's going to further depress the prices. The price for virgin PET resin is going to be a lot cheaper than recycle. I saw another question pop up relevant to that. Lowering crude oil prices or natural gas prices really doesn't change the cost of making good, high quality recycled PET. It's mostly a physical mechanical process. So the crude oil prices are going to be low, and the premium price that we have to be willing to pay for recycled PET is going to be significant and higher than we previously expected. So it's going to be a challenging couple of years, and I'll pass it directly to my colleague Joel Morales for him to talk about the other polymers that we're engaged in. Thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Tyson. So we're going to talk about polyethylene and polypropylene primarily. And there are some commonalities between these resins and what Tyson had shown. So this first chart is just the global prices for high density blow molding starting from January of 17 going through December of 21. And you clearly see we've fallen off on prices, and we're actually at price points we haven't seen in over a decade. These price points, per Tyson's point, is the drop in the costs to make resins is different than for recycle, right? So recycle costs don't change very much. We thought the conditions were challenging before all this. The conditions for recyclers are now even more challenging. So globally, we have some challenges for both polyethylene and polypropylene in that there's a lot of supply that was already coming on. And the COVID impact, while we hear of pockets of success stories in food packaging specifically, the overarching impact to the globe is much less demand than we were anticipating for both materials. If we look to the next slide, just to show you exactly the challenges and some of the recycle components, this is a North American chart showing the prices of natural post-consumer recycle in green and the mixed color post-consumer recycle in orange compared to virgin prime. We were already facing some difficulties being competitive with any recycle component. On the natural side, people use natural because you can make white color, you can control the process. If you have a need for PCR and natural, it's because someone down the chain has dictated its use. It's a specialty product, as you can see, and while it's coming down, it still has a significant gap versus virgin. And even the mixed color piece has run into challenges with lower virgin and wide spec prices. So just a challenging environment for the post-consumer recycle. As we jump to polypropylene, you kind of see a similar event where prices have come off recent highs with lower crude, and going forward, they stay at lower levels. So the message is for virgin plastics, there's a lot of it for polyethylene and polypropylene for the next few years. Resin producers are going to be challenged on their margins. We're going to really see a test on sustainability for some of the brand owners and their goals. There's some things happening in the near term here in North America that are a bit surprising. We've all seen in the news that bag bans in New York have been delayed. And frankly, markets that were supposed to see anywhere from down 5 to 8% reduction in their consumption this year because of bag bans are actually booming now as grocery stores can't keep up with consumers at home purchasing. And instead of being down 5%, they're most likely going to be up 5 to 8%. So single-use plastic has definitely gotten an injection near term. We're trying to determine how long that'll last. We do believe sustainability is a key to the world and will come back into play. The question is, does it come back into play in sometime in 2020, or is it more prolonged when we're way past this impact of COVID? So just a couple of things while we have folks, just a reminder that IHS Markit does have an extensive list of market advisory services to help folks understand trends and pricing of both virgin and post-consumer recycle. And the last slide is, given how important sustainability is to the market, we're developing, next slide please, we're developing a multi-client study that takes all the implications of not only recycle, but carbon capture and how the markets transition to circularity. Very complex subject that we plan to have a multi-client study done here by this summer. So please let us know if you have any questions. And with that, I'll hand it back to our moderator. Thank you.
Great. So we just have an intermittent poll here. This is Marissa Segundo again with RRS. And so if we did this before, there was a lot of responses. So we're using the same method, but what are your biggest recycling concerns? And if you just want to put that up on the screen now, and we'll kind of read through these, and then we'll pass the mic over to Nina Butler with more recycling. So we're seeing value in the marketplace being a concern, lack of end markets, decreased demand, terminating recycling programs. I don't think I can read this that fast. Virgin prices, no regulation, contamination seems to be a resounding theme, and consistency of raw supply. So you can continue to put those in there. I'm going to turn it now over to Nina. Nina, do we have audio for you?
Yep. Thank you very much, Marissa. I appreciate that. Can you go back or jumped ahead to one? Yep. So thank you very much. Now more than ever, there is a need to evaluate how we manage resources efficiently and how the full value chain can align to shift out of this linear model that dominates today. And we believe better decisions start with better information. As an NRC board member, I also want to extend my gratitude to RS, EPA, and the panelists for sharing information with participants. More Recycling is a consulting and research firm focused on how plastics impact broader sustainability goals. And in partnering with IHS Markit on the global analysis, the previous study, what we've been able to look at the supply and demand for virgin recycled plastics, we recognize this deep need to focus more on how we value carbon and how we ultimately navigate really complex trade-offs. We know that plastics bring this paradox of benefits and challenges as we strive to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, reduce food waste, water consumption, and fuel consumption. So for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to give a high-level update, kind of picking up where Joelle left off on the plastic recycling market, as well as Tison, and then introduce you to our new recycling market development platform, which is now live today on circularityinaction.com. Next slide. Here's the theoretical flow of material. The export market faded away as it's been predicted for some time. And also folks just don't recycle as much as they could if we had incentives. So we have lower recycling on the collection on the right side. We have fewer markets. We have an oversupply of virgin material. And now we are truly in this perfect storm, as I think we've all identified with the shale gas revolution and now COVID. This is the time that I think will define the leaders in sustainability, from policymakers to producers and consumers. We all play a significant role. Market drivers, such as the California law requiring recycled content in bags, has essentially the driver for using PCR has gone away with the suspension of the law. With the price of virgin lower than PCR and the unfounded concern that using PCR is a risk due to COVID, purchase orders for PCR are being canceled. Reclaimers are in an even more challenging place. Their higher quality supply is drying up as some MRFs suspend operations, particularly in California. Return to retail for deposit material and bags and wraps are being suspended. We definitely need to develop alternative options to recover flexibles. And given this shift to more e-commerce, I believe we need to look at creative reverse logistics with more producer responsibility. Challenges exist with collection to sorting and processing to end-use demand. The entire system is truly in crisis. Next slide. So here's one of the key insights of the more IHS Markit partnership. On the left is the total capacity for olefin production. That's high density polyethylene, low density polyethylene, polypropylene for the top 10 virgin resin producers in the US, and then nearly all of the olefin reclaimers is on the right. So we have less than 5% of the capacity relative to the production for the top 10 virgin resin producers. We obviously need to build up our reclamation capacity, but with the challenges I just described, the less supply of high quality bales and little, and in some cases no demand for PCR from converters, the value prop is truly evaporating. With low prices from virgin to the low cost of landfilling, there's little incentive for the key stakeholders in the value chain to align for circularity. Reclaimers need us to keep recycling, and they especially need us to put value on products with recycled content. Next slide. Moore has been conducting the annual plastic recycling study for more than 10 years. We survey reclaimers and exporters in North America and analyze the data and share through multiple reports that are broken down by major commodities. So this is the overall aggregate of each of the reports comparing total commodities collected for domestic and export consumption. Export has been on the decline with major drops in 2017. Domestic purchasing has increased, but not enough to offset the decline in export. 2017 was the first year we saw a drop in collection, and the 2018 reports will be released in the next month, I believe. The trend is not positive. Next slide. We also track bale prices for plastic commodities. Joelle showed some PCR, so this is going down to the bale price. This is just a sample of the commodities that we track. The gray area is the price of oil on the back, and then the turquoise line on the top is the price of natural HTV bottles. And as Joelle was explaining, that's really the most sought after material, the highest quality that can approach the drop in compared to virgin. The lines on the bottom though are the more mixed resin and film materials that had much more dependence on the export market and are really struggling now. And it also makes up the majority of the packaging. Bottles are a smaller portion and shrinking relative to the growth in smaller format and flexible materials. The market events that you can see over time is the Great Recession, the warning from China with the green fence, and then the national sword and blue sky, and then predominantly the shale gas revolution, and now we're into COVID. The low oil and gas prices are putting tremendous downward pressure on commodities. So the great economic challenge to achieving a circular economy, with that we decided to make our market-based tools available in a holistic platform to share critical information and bring transparency to the marketplace. Next slide. So now live on circularityiinaction.com, we offer the recycling market development platform to drive better policy, more innovation, and more action. So we need more people to be aware of what the current state is, but more importantly, to remind people of the benefits of recycling and learn how they can support circularity. Users can explore the supply-demand dynamics, and we'll be hearing from Bill Moore next, but we feature some of his data on the slide to look at the capacity for fiber. The platform is for all materials, not just plastic, and we welcome collaborators and supporters. Our goal is to bring forward critical information from all of the thought leaders, not just from us at Moore. This is the first version, and we have a big vision for how this platform will scale. The priority is driving action. So from this view, you can click into a directory. Next slide. The directory is then you can filter by the material role in action. And so what's rolling through are how you click through to specific tools. So you can look at finding supplies of PCR that exist now. You can look at finding products with recycled content. And then very importantly, how we recognize those giants of the recycling economy and amplify the existing programs that are out there to amplify demand through the APR Demand Champions program, EPA's WasteWise program. We really got to elevate and look at those benefits. So one example in Circularity in Action is we have the example of KW, that's a major supplier of polypropylene. That was a material that was really emerging and starting to grow. So you can find that on plastic markets, and then all the way through to a product like Lush. Overall, what we really encourage folks to do is get involved. We'd love to include more tools engage in how we can bring more transparency to the marketplace. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. That brings us up to Bill. Bill, we are ready when you are.
May be muted.
Bill, are you there?
Can you hear me?
All right, I can hear you.
Okay, next slide, please. So Moore & Associates is an analyst and researcher and strategic consulting firm dealing with the paper industry and the paper recycling industry worldwide. So this, the key takeaways on this slide are a couple of things. One is that the overall production of paper and paper packaging in the U.S. really peaked in the 2010 era and is slowly coming down. The other takeaway from the blue bars are that recycled fiber, recovered paper are a fundamental part of the industry's furnish recipe, both in the U.S. and worldwide. And I would tell you that these are yield-adjusted shares. So that's the takeaway on this slide, and that growth of and recycled fiber has been moving upwards. Next slide, please. Box shipments, corrugated boxes are both an important supply of recyclables in terms of OCC and also in demand for recycled fiber. And you can see back in 1999 was the biggest year for corrugated boxes in a long time. The industry measures box production by billions of square feet. And you can see for actually the next 20 years, the use of corrugated boxes went down, and that was because of the offshoring of manufacturing to China. But starting in around 2014 and accelerating into 18, the rise of e-commerce brought the use of corrugated boxes back, and we would have hit just about the level of 1999 in this year. And we have three scenarios going forward, and it's all mostly driven by e-commerce box shipments, and the COVID-19 pandemic has caused an uptick in the corrugated box business and e-commerce, and that's a structural change. And the blue line is a high growth usage based on what the industry experienced in the last 3 or 4 years. The medium line assumes there's going to be less packaging and over packaging of outside packaging of corrugated boxes and more use of flexibles. And the green line is a low base case where the use of alternative materials and ship in own container and right sized boxes will have fairly slow corrugated box growth. Next slide, please. So what this leads is a worldwide growth in recovered paper RCP demand. And you can see the blue line stands out at the top. OCC has been steadily increasing and will continue to increase. The other three grade categories, high grades, old newspapers, and mixed paper, are used at a much lower level. And the use of old newspapers are going down, and also high grades are declining. Mixed paper has finally started to tick up, and actually it's a fair amount of tonnage, but from the scale standpoint of getting OCC on here, you can't see much of an uptick, but it is happening. Next slide, please. So this is a chart which shows a basket of of recovered paper prices. This is a ticker put out by Fast Markets and RISI, and it's a combination of a number of grades, including mixed paper, news, OCC, and high grades. And if you go back to April of 2016, after some sluggish times in 15 and 16, the market started a normal move up, and then China bought heavily and rose the price quite a bit. Then we went through a seesaw on the Chinese import restrictions, and that led us into 2019 where everything went down. And then we hit the bottom in early this year, and the market started to turn up, and it really a coronavirus effect with not only new demand, but the collection was down, and it's really been driving the prices up. Next slide, please. So there are a number of new projects around the country to use recycled fiber, and they're fairly well distributed in many geographies. Next slide, please. And Chinese mill companies are also investing in new projects to use recycled fiber, and I listed those here. The Old Town, Maine one happens to be a virgin fiber mill. Next slide. And there are other North American recycled fiber pulp mill projects that will ship the product to China, and I've listed them here. There's quite an interest in this sector and moving forward, it will provide some additional markets for us in the U.S. I think that's my last slide.
Thank you, Bill. We have just a couple, just one in-between poll questions. As you know, NRC, or you may not know, but NRC has a lot of different initiatives to encourage purchasing with recycled content. So if you can just very quickly answer the question, do you have guidelines for purchasing items with recycled content? As we're all aware that driving markets also requires the use of the recycled content and really demanding that recycled content. So I'm seeing a lot on the yes side, which is good, and not so much on the I need help. So I would encourage you to go to NRC's website. They have great resources there, and that is part of their mission to help out with recycled content. So please use that to your advantage, and we'll see that, seeing still 48%. Good job, guys. And I will turn it now over to Scott DeFife to talk about glass.
Thanks, Marissa. And thanks for everybody hanging around to have Glass wrap up the presentations here. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. I am the president of the Glass Packaging Institute, but also involved in the leadership organization of the Glass Recycling Coalition and the president of the Glass Recycling Foundation now. A little bit different. I'm not going to have as many facts and figures as far as numbers here, but talk to you about the glass container industry and the essential need for recycling glass. I did see some questions about end markets, and I'm going to try to incorporate those. And I did see some questions about essential operations and food and beverage packaging. Obviously, during the COVID response was deemed essential. Or food and beverage manufacturing, and then by extension, the packaging of that, both lined by Homeland Security and then followed up by all of the states that were coming in with stay-at-home orders. Waste management and recycling also deemed essential. And this is a great opportunity to point out the connection between the two, because many of the materials that get gathered in the recycling stream are raw materials for manufacturing in the food and beverage production area, as well as many others. For glass in particular, over 90% of glass containers are food and beverage or pharmaceutical containers. And so it is very much, recycled glass is very much a part of the regular manufacturing of glass containers in the United States today, with nearly 1/3 of your average bottle or jar being recycled content as of right now. With record consumer demands during the COVID response and shifts away from on-premise to food and grocery, the product has been flying off the shelf, and the demand for food and beverage packaging has been strong as well. The entire supply chain is needed to meet that demand. There is a bit of a recycled content supply challenge due to one of the other presenters talked about the bottle redemption states, and that is across the board with aluminum, PET, and glass, given that many of the states are not enforcing redemption to retail. The redemption is usually largely still happening, or can, I don't want to say is happening, but can happen. It's not disallowed, other than in Michigan has closed down the bottle rooms. which we're working on. But in most of the rest of the states, you can redeem, and some redemption centers are still open. It's just that the state isn't enforcing fines against those retailers who are choosing not to redeem right now. So this is the COVID response time is a great opportunity to educate people about the link to cullet supply, new container production, and innovative recovery options. One more thing on the redemption states, we worked with the Can Manufacturing Institute, Aluminum Association, and NAPCOR to send letters to all of the governors and the policy leaders in the redemption states to urge them to keep redemption opportunities open, recycling opportunities open. This would extend to all of the other states as well that need to pick up the slack. We can go to the next slide. But this is an outlook of the U.S. Glass infrastructure, if you will. I saw a couple questions about end markets, and anywhere you see a dot here is a potential user of recycled cullet, and there are many more. These are just the manufacturing plants, glass container manufacturing plants, recycling processors, and fiberglass plants. And so the red states being the bottle deposit states for glass containers, because of quality, and I do want to emphasize quality in terms of end markets, around 60%, 58 to 60% of the cullet that ends up going back into bottles and jars is coming from one of those 10 states. I guess we left Hawaii off, I guess, or maybe it's over there in the Pacific Ocean there, but Hawaii is also a bottle redemption state. So the problem for us now is with less cullet coming in from, or temporary shortages in returns in these states, we need to pick up the slack in the rest of the country. But anywhere you see one of these dots, we have opportunities for glass. I am struck by all the times I have to answer media questions for statements from sometimes landfill owners or MRF operators who say there's quote unquote no markets for glass, which is just absolutely not true. And most strikingly, I hear it a lot of times when there are multiple glass container manufacturers or fiberglass markets in the very state where we're hearing that there are no markets. So I do want to challenge that assumption that there are no markets for glass. And in fact, glass container manufacturers would like to increase the content, the percentage of recycled content across the average from around 33 to 35% up to 50% in the next decade. One of the problems for us is that the material flow in the non-bottle redemption states, this is a material flow chart for glass material in non-redemption states, shows that nearly 40% of it, 45% of it, we're not even ever getting our hands on. And much of that is quality material, bar and restaurant glass, on-premise glass from before. Now, during COVID, we've got a bar and restaurant on-premise issue, but that's whole bottle glass that's not ever getting touched and going directly to landfill. I think in the glass container area, our primary issue is collection and getting our hands on that and getting those the quality material to the marketplace. But you can see here that there are multiple outlets for this besides container glass. There's fiberglass, there are other bead and block and other mineral replacement end markets here, but very little of the glass, due to quality issues, ends up back in containers when it goes through the MRF system. Next slide. But what is possible? Like I said, the U.S. container manufacturers are looking at trying to figure out a way to get to our 50% goal for use of recycled cullet across the industry average. And like I said, on-premise glass, that bar and restaurant glass, that good glass, there are estimates that there is at least 50% more glass available to us that we're never touching than that which is collected from the bottle redemption states. But in Europe, the averages are twice as much as the United States. Now, we know that there's very fundamental differences in recovery and deposit systems in Europe, but it is possible, and we look to increase that percentage going forward. And that's it for me, Marissa.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. We have just a couple more poll questions, I think just one, and I'm going to hand it over to Chantal, who has feverishly been going through questions. Once again, if you have a question, you can put that into the Q&A box. So that's not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and our panelists are looking through those right now. We've got some time to answer them. So our multiple choice question, once again, if you're using the Poll EV software or pollev.com/recycle123, that's how you can respond, or you can also respond via the text, and that's also in your chat. So the question we're asking is multiple choice, and we are asking if how aware are you, how aware are your decision makers of, oh, I think this just did not go. Hold on one second. How aware are your decision makers of the importance of recycled content? And I think there's actually an issue with this slide. So I'm gonna just toss it over to Chantal for the questions.
Sure, that works, Marissa. We've had so many questions with nearly 1,000 people joining our webinar. It's going to be difficult to get to everybody's. And so with that being said, we're going to just send out all the relevant links after the event. Fortunately, the webinar software allows us to pull the questions and some of the things that were asked of the panelists. And so we want to be sure that you have all of those resources, especially if you joined late. There will be a recording of the webinar, which will be posted to nrcrecycles.org for your further review and playback of the information presented. There's a lot of details, and so I know some people want to go back and find that information. So at this time, we are going to take some questions, and if I don't get to all of them, which I know we won't, we're limited on time, we're going to compile FAQs, frequently asked questions, after the webinar to get the answer to you. Our speakers have agreed to respond to some of the answers that were directly posted to them, and so we do want to be responsive and help you out with your specific inquiries. So at this time, I'd like to pose a question to our panelists. If you had a crystal ball and could tell us a little bit about what the future holds for recycling markets in the U.S. in the near term, give us an idea of what you see in terms of, collection, infrastructure, and investment in your response. And so we'll start off. I think Joe had to drop off for another webinar, but in that case, we can start off with Tison or Joelle and Nina, and then Bill and Scott.
It's Tison. Okay, I'll give it a shot. I mean, I'm by nature optimistic. I mean, I've seen in my life a lot of other environmental problems, once people became aware of them and alert to them, have been solved. And I think this is a soluble problem myself. I think that there's, we need some technology development. We need awareness on behalf of the consumers in particular, who are really ultimately, at the end of the day, going to pay the price. I mean, recycling is not free. At least for the next couple of years, there's going to be a premium price on polymer products at least. And we need a willingness to, an awareness to step up and continue to support the NGOs and the governmental bodies that are trying to tackle the problem, and help us to find an economic solution. So that's my response.
This is Joel on the PE and PP front. Unfortunately, I think this momentum of sustainability really gets delayed here because we're going into a global recession. Consumers are going to be looking at their wallets closer than they have in over a decade. And it's going to be very challenging to have strong growth in recycling when consumers are going to be tempted with and brand owners alike are going to be tempted to take advantage of some of the cheapest virgin prices we've had, like I said, in over a decade. So the COVID impact definitely delays, in my mind, the implementation of sustainability requirements. And I even think brand owners are going to try to get through the challenging economic time also, and we'll have to reevaluate their commitments. And some of the commitments, as we've seen in history, you make goals and you don't get there, but you get close, and you really don't get punished for getting halfway through your goal. So I think there'll be a lot of that here in the future.
Thank you, Joel. It's good to be honest here. I agree. I think we've got a lot greater challenge ahead of us. And I guess my optimistic side, if I try to look at another view of this, is that we had been really focused on the issues that we could see with the growing plastic pollution, particularly marine debris. But as we have this pause, this global pandemic, we also are seeing clear skies, and perhaps the focus might go to the things we haven't been able to see that are very imminent risks in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And when we put our focus on carbon, I believe it unlocks all of the economic challenges that are needed to really set in motion sustainability goals and really using materials more wisely.
And this is Joe Pickard. I'm actually still on the line. If you don't mind my just jumping in, I would say that, looking forward, the market dynamics can be quite different depending on what commodity we're talking about. I don't disagree that for the plastics markets, they're going to have a difficult time, especially given the volatility in the energy markets. But I think for other commodities like the metals, for example, you're seeing a lot of supply disruptions in terms of prime metal production, which will actually incentivize more scrap consumption. So I think for the short term, there's no question that we're having an extreme economic contraction. I think Oxford Economics is looking at something like a 36% contraction in second quarter GDP. And so there's no way around the impacts of a slowdown in manufacturing and economic output. But I would also say that because such a large supply of the material comes through the municipal residential stream, I think that sort of re-emphasizes the importance of ensuring the quality of the material that's coming through that residential stream, and re-emphasizing the importance of that to communities and to policymakers, I think is going to be key going forward.
Are we, this is Scott from GPI, can take a stab at this
Yep,
as well.
Scott, jump in.
Sure. And there's been a couple other, I think my talk spurred a flurry of glass questions I'll try to get to, but they do relate to the same thing. I think there are a variety of different tactics that can be taken across the country. Every region and every specific market is different and specific to what's the infrastructure in your area. There are some great lessons and best practices that we promote through the Glass Recycling Coalition that we've incorporated into a MRF certification program, that if the MRF operations for glass meet some very basic international standards that will improve the quality of the material coming out of them, then there should be markets for the material that's coming out of those MRFs. If we cannot get the MRF, well, in addition, in Minnesota, which has a great reputation for glass recovery and end market use, which is not a bottle deposit state, they've got simple tactics, simple changes in operations that have taught them lessons about how to increase the quality of that material. Everything from, how hard the hydraulic presses, are calibrated at the truck on the street level, to how fast the belts move at the MRFs, things of that nature. But if we can't get a specific MRF to produce some good quality material, then we have to take alternative collection models into mind. There's a great model in the Midwest. Ripple has perfected a drop-off model that is going really well out there. Northern Virginia is using a glass drop-off to dramatically increase the amount of quality glass that is now going to bottle plants, when prior to that it was all going to MRFs in Virginia, landfills in Virginia. There are policies that need to be considered, along with landfill pricing and things of that nature. But with some, on specific market questions, I would just ask people, you can reach out to me at our GPI website. You can reach to me through email through our gpi.org website. If you have any specific market questions, I'd love to follow up with you too.
Great, Scott. Thank you so much. Bill, were you able to connect again?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So in the short run, the lack of collections from the commercial sector is really driving the recovered paper markets upward. The tissue business is strong, and the use of office papers is declining, and that's a structural change that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to change. And even if the economy does turn down quite a bit, the tissue white side of the business remains good. On the corrugated box side, we're lack of commercial collections and commercial entities operating, and the new capacity coming in should bode well for it. The short term, the box business is quite good. Our concern is that if we have a serious, more than 1 quarter meltdown in the economy, that will affect the OCC prices and the box business going forward.
Marissa, we have a poll going, and so I was wondering if you could catch us up on the poll and see what's happening there.
Sure. So since you all are experts at answering this live poll, I just went ahead and put this up on the screen, asking what the biggest takeaway from this session today was. And we've heard a lot about end markets versus virgin raw materials. Definitely seeing a lot of staying the course, and really a lot of the attendees seem to get a lot out of this as far as learning more about the markets, and are appreciative of this opportunity.
Absolutely, and I'm loving seeing all the connections that our attendees are making. And so with that, we're nearing the end of our webinar. If you could switch it over to the last slide.
Sorry, I'm having some issues with my...
All right. Well, so while Marissa's working through that, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit through the last slide. We're going to be compiling the questions and posting them as FAQs, making those available by email. The recording will be available online at nrcrecycles.org. And so we want your feedback. We want to know what your future needs are. There were some mentions of, is there a public education and outreach person present? Are you going to address composting? Well, so these are great inputs for us as a National Recycling Coalition to understand what the needs are for information and being able to provide that with high-level speakers and great online support through the poll everywhere. And so these are things that we're going to take back, discuss. In fact, we have a debrief this afternoon to take all of the information that was provided. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is become a direct member of the National Recycling Coalition. If you aren't already, you can go to nrcrecycles.org. We'd also like to ask you if you have the opportunity to donate to our 501c3. We're a lean, mean team, but of course donations do help us make our programming go farther and to provide that national support that is so needed. We want to thank our speakers. Gosh, I'm so impressed and so overwhelmed with the level of knowledge that we were able to provide in just an hour and a half. And I feel like we could have gone all day, but that is, certainly something that we wanted to provide in the future. And our support from Resource Recycling Systems, Renew, EPA, our sponsor all the way, our leadership with Dave Keeling as president, and all of our board members, many of whom are on the call today. You're behind the scenes and we see you and we appreciate you. We appreciate you, government, education, industry, scientists, all of you. You're doing such a great job, and we just want to say, provide us with your feedback. You're going to get a survey, and just remember, together we are recycling. We are the National Recycling Coalition, and with that, we are finished with our webinar. It is 1:30 and the recording will end. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.